everyone, Ariel Adams here with the aBlogtoWatch Superlative Podcast. Be sure to listen to our other podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest in news and reviews. My guests today are the founders of Papar Watch Company, Emily Rosenberg and Josh Blank. They are a husband and wife team. Emily and Josh, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. We're excited to be here.
Same. So excited. Thank you.
We're going to talk a little bit about your journey getting to where you are right now. And I've realized that speaking to so many founders of small watch brands, it's less a business decision and more of a journey because it involves a lot of strange decisions. It is, you told me that part of your dream to become digital nomads, you're like, what can we do from afar? Oh, watch company. Not the typical choice, but part of how you reach this point. What you'll see when you take apart most of today's cool watch brands is that it is not, I had 4 generations of watchmaking and I wanted to start a brand. It is a very different route there. It's more of an artistic route. And I think that's interesting. I don't know how long it'll last, to be honest, but I love all the different types of people and backgrounds that come together to the space. So let's first go straight to the product. You have one watch right now. We have an article about, I haven't seen it yet, but we have an article about it, and I've seen pictures of it, of course, on aBlogtoWatch. Talk about this product. What is the name of it, and what were you trying to do with it?
Sure. First, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be speaking with you tonight. So the watch that we've released, the first watch from Papar Watch Company, is the Anillo Sector Dial GMT. And so what it is it's a vintage-sized but brutalist in design and feel watch. It's 36 millimeters in diameter, 43 millimeters lug to lug, and 12 millimeters high. And it is we have two models of it. We have a steel and we have a rose gold PVD. They're released in a series of 100 sequentially numbered watches each. And we're actually shipping them out in the next week or two. So very, very excited and thrilled to have received the welcome that we've received and the press from you guys and such an amazing review from Ripley and just the amazing feedback we felt from people and the sales, obviously, and that a lot of people are excited about what we did.
So at this time, you don't have the experience yet of the buyers wearing it, giving you feedback, sharing their response. That's a crucial part, right? You haven't got there yet. Are you nervous, excited? How do you feel?
We've gotten on the wrists of as many people as we can. So it's kind of a wild experience starting a watch company for the first time. And, this is the first time Em or I have done anything in the sort of physical product space. I'm a lawyer by background. I started a tech company before, and Em worked in magazines for a long time, which are physical, but never releasing a physical product. And so it is a little nerve-wracking. But at the same time, we've chased down people on the streets and tossed them on their wrists and had, everyone we meet try it on and gone through, a few iterations of prototypes like that. So I think we feel pretty good about the quality of the design and the product that we're putting out there and pretty confident in that.
Can I jump in there for a second? Also, beyond being excited about seeing it in the world, I'm so excited for that conversation to start once the product is released. Like, what do people like? What do they don't like? And just hearing that feedback and that excitement. And I know it's not always going to be excitement. We may hear some negative feedback, but that's only going to help improve us going forward. So I think that loop will be a really interesting time for us as a company to grow.
I want you to explain in detail, actually, the experience of watching somebody wear your product for the first time. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is it's a very big part of the emotional experience for anybody who comes out with a product. It's crucial for getting feedback. And as someone that hasn't really been in it before, it's a very novel experience because wearing something on your wrist that you designed is actually very different than seeing it on a third party's wrist. So you mentioned, of course, you got it on Ripley's wrist. You got it on some other people's wrists. Talk about how you felt. Again, go into detail if you can about what it was like to see when other people were wearing it. What did you think about the watch? What did you think about their reactions? Obviously, this is going to be an ongoing thing. You're always going to need to gauge reactions. Share.
Yeah, I would say that in a word, it was humbling. It's a wild experience, early on with the prototyping, right when we had first gotten the version before this, before the production version, which had a few differences from this. It had crown guards, which were a bad idea and did not work at all. And it also had a bit of a slab-sided feel that actually M, in one of the roles that M has in the brand, is being really the creative director of the brand, and saw that and said, we need to do something to break that up. It feels too heavy. So that led to some of the significant changes on the side of the watch that happened after that. But with that previous version, I met a guy who's in the watch space in the city, in New York City, for a drink one night. And, I don't know a ton of people in the watch space, but I did know him, and we met up. And I said to him, because I was still in that sort of imposter syndrome place, like what right do I, as a lawyer and startup guy, have to design a watch? And I remember I sat down with him, and the three of them were on the table over cocktails. And I said to him, look, I was like, just be completely honest. Like, tell me if it sucks. And if it sucks, like, I don't know that we're going to stop outright, but, I really respect your opinion. And he said to me, I see a lot of things that suck, and this doesn't suck. And so sometimes,
encouraging.
Sometimes someone telling you something doesn't suck is better than them telling you that they love it, because it's more genuine. So that was a wild, validating experience. And then each time someone else, puts it on their wrist and seeing it seeing it from different perspectives, seeing it on a large wrist, seeing it on a small wrist, seeing it on the wrists of, people of a wide range of ethnicities and orientations. It feels different on everyone else. And I think we take something away from that each time.
Okay, but we also have to talk about, we have a little household competition going. Now, granted, we have not seen it on everyone's wrist, and totally get that. But originally, we were only going to launch one colorway, and then Josh sort of came back with this rose gold, which I'm wearing right now, and I just immediately fell in love. And I was like, no. We have to add this. We have to find a way to add this. And so we went back and forth trying to find that best way to execute two watches from the get-go. And now in our lovely little home in the Berkshires, every time an order comes in, the first question that anyone asks is, okay, which color did they get? Because we have Team Steel over there with Josh Blank and Rose Gold over here. So no pressure. Every watch is a good watch, but it's just a nice little in-house, I don't know, narrative competition.
No, that's healthy. I mean, look, brands very carefully look to see what sells. It is very rarely something you can predict in advance. There's a very small number of people in the industry who have the experience, who can be like, yeah, that dial clearly going to be the winner. Okay, it's, again, people can know what's good and bad, but almost every situation I've seen where people release multiple colors, they are sometimes surprised. Maybe they don't. Maybe they know what wholesalers will order, like stores, but the consumer can be quite beguiling. So what that leads to is a situation where you have to constantly experiment, right? And that's a question that I wanted to ask right now, because you have a watch that's being shipped. You've done a little bit of, we'll call it R&D, which means you prototype something, you look at it, you make a decision that you want to change something physically about it. You mentioned the shape of the case. The sides were too flat. You wanted to break it up a little bit, create a little bit more dimensionality. Now, here's the question. You obviously at some point need to be like, okay, we have to make something. How long would you have liked to have the R&D process go? Would you have liked double the time? Do you feel like it was enough? Is it an infinite process? Talk a little bit about how much time you feel is necessary to properly prototype a watch so that it aesthetically looks nice, because on the screen, anything could look nice.
I think it's funny. So I am laughing. And just to jump in for a second, then take it away. You want to say something, just jump in. To me, we went really quickly, I think, on all of this. And that's partially because we were very, I don't know, foolishly maybe, I don't know, confident about what we had created. And also because, I'll say honestly, I have a really hard time putting things down once I pick them up. And so we just kind of kept going, and I kept finding ways to get it done and to move forward. And because of that, we started this. I mean, the first idea for the initial version of the watch came onto paper about a year and a half ago. And that was really just a sketch. And over the course of that time, we got from, sketch on paper through to doing the CAD renderings to doing, I think, 3 or 4 rounds of prototyping, filing 2 patents, and getting the watches out there. So I don't know that I wish we had more time, because we kind of, like we were saying before, we didn't set out to create a watch company. This was very much an iterative process. So I don't think I think we took as much time as we needed to. Anne?
Yeah, I'm smiling because yesterday morning at 7:15, Josh was like asking me questions about the watch, and I was like, coffee first, then watch. But I truly don't think we could have worked at this speed without the amazing team that we've had in the support network that Josh has sort of found throughout his networking. And also, I have to say, like, from a creative director point of view, working with my husband, my partner, as a designer, it was amazing to see the amount of trust that he had in himself while he was creating this, right? And I think when you have that trust in your design, in your process, you can move quickly. So I think it was twofold for me. I think it's the trust and the team that really also allowed us to work at this accelerated speed.
By trust, do you mean that Josh knew what he wanted, meaning he had an idea in his mind for what it was supposed to look like, and that allowed him to push forward because he had a vision to realize?
Yeah, 100%. I think the point of view was so clear for him that it came to fruition really easily. And sometimes I think as a creative, that can be really nerve-wracking because you're like, this was a little too easy. This should be hard. This should be a little bit harder. But no, I think he trusted the process and he trusted himself, and it just came, I don't know, I don't want to say so easily. I'm not the designer, but from the outside, that's sort of what it seemed like. Yes. So
what came first, the decision to start a brand or the idea that you want to see this aesthetic on your wrist?
Yeah, I think, well, first I want to say that, none of this, I don't want to turn this into a couples therapy podcast, but none of this would have been possible without M's support and incredible work on designing the entire sort of holistic view of this watch and of the company. So I definitely don't get all the credit there.
No, but each brand has to have an impetus, meaning one day you had this idea for a shape and you're like, you know what? I'd like to see that shape on my wrist. Or the impetus is, I think it'd be cool to start a watch brand. Obviously, I need to have a watch to make. That's going to come second. But I really like this idea of starting a watch brand. So one of those things has to come first, right?
Yeah, it was definitely the design in this case. And the idea of starting a watch brand came so far down the line. So it came about, honestly, I was just thinking about watches as, I don't know, I kind of tend to do. I'm sure you can relate to that feeling, Ariel. I came up with this idea for how can I, show GMT time in a unique way. And this idea of a laser cut dial with sort of a GMT disc behind it really stuck with me. And so I created a first design of, just the dial, not even into the case yet. And I fell in love with it. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I looked at it for weeks. And then one day it hit me that it only had 12 indices. You could only tell the GMT time every other hour, which is not useful for a GMT, obviously. And so I kept sort of thinking on it. And I've always loved sector dials as a design. And I thought, I think there's a real opportunity there. Why isn't there a functional sector dial? And so that led to what became, the dial on the Anillo, which is taking the sector dial, making the inner ring of the sector dial 24 sectors instead of 12, and laser cutting them out with the GMT disc rotating underneath it with the triangle showing the time there. And it wasn't until later on, we can talk about this later, but that the color changing logo came into effect. But I designed that dial, and then I was just sort of messing around with shapes. I'm not a illustrator. I designed it all in Google Slides, which was kind of wild to say. But so I designed it.
You use what you know, right?
You use what you know. I've joked with Em that I think I'd use Microsoft Paint if that was still available, still used to PC. As simple as possible. So I came to a design and I really loved it. And I thought, okay, how can I, again, no chance of starting a watch company, not even in our minds. I thought, how can I get one of these on my wrist? And so I reached out on Instagram to a guy I'd followed for a while, who's a pretty well-known Seiko modder with a pretty big following. This guy, George, he's Coda Watches. And I reached out to him. I said to him, I have this kind of crazy idea. Would you be open to doing this project? And over the course of a few months, George and I worked together. I learned a ton about watches and how they sort of get put together, and iterated on that. And he built a first version of what became the Anillo. It was using a Seiko NH34, so it was not a true GMT. So it functioned entirely differently, obviously, than the Miyota 9075 driven Anillo does. But he made one for me, in a off-the-shelf Grand Seiko style case, and I got it. I put it on my wrist, and I was like, "This is great! Like, if it ends here, that's enough." And I think that's been the theme, throughout each step of this. If it ends here, that's enough. And I wore that for a while, and then I remember saying to him, I was like, "This is so cool, and I could wear this for the rest of my life. And if someone says, cool watch, what is it? I can say, thank you. I designed this, and that'll feel great. My other watches will mostly sit in the box." But it really stuck with us, this idea of like, can we do this? Can we actually make a watch in the case style that I had designed? And so it went from there. Through a whole bunch of dumb luck, things fell into place. I reached out to a buddy of mine from college who works in supply chain management in Asia, because very early on, Em and I talked about this and decided that if we were going to do anything, we wanted to do something that was excessively priced. We didn't feel the need to make it Swiss just for the sake of making it Swiss. We wanted to make it beautiful and well made and well constructed and thoughtful and durable. But beyond that, we didn't feel the need to make it one way because we should, or because the world said we should. And a lot to Em's point earlier about trying to think about this outside of the box and do things differently. So my friend Will said, I know nothing about watches and jewelry, but my friend Moon lives in Shenzhen, and she knows the space really well. So he introduced me to her, and I spoke to her, and she said, kind of dumb luck, there's a trade show focused on the watch industry here in Shenzhen in 2 weeks. Why don't I go over there? I'll meet with a bunch of factories. I'll whittle it down to 3 or 4. I'll go visit them, and I'll come back to you with 2 factories, and we'll choose from there. And so to the timeline, in the course of less than a month, from talking to Will, we had a factory, and to do the production, we had started figuring out sourcing of movements, and it really, then it became, oh, are we actually going to do this? Are we actually going to start a watch company? So that's the short-ish version of the journey.
Did those entities make it easy for you? Obviously, watch factories want to build watches, and so anything they can do to facilitate that makes sense. There's various stages of what am I doing, especially when you're about to sink a bunch of money into making stuff that you don't know what you'll do with necessarily. But talk about what it's like, because people tend to have mixed experiences working with watch suppliers. On the one hand, suppliers in that part of the world are very accommodating and very fast. But of course, there's a lot of horror stories about they didn't produce what I wanted. And there's all kinds of things like that. Talk a little bit about that process of finding these people that you're placing an enormous amount of trust into.
Yeah, we got very lucky. We have had nothing, and maybe not just lucky. Moon really did the diligence, and I trusted Will to know that she was the right person. This wasn't just going online and Googling how do I make a watch. And we were at the same time really fortunate, because the factory we've been working with, we haven't heard a no from them. We've only heard let us figure out how to make it work. And everything on the Anillo, other than the Miyota movement, is 100% bespoke and designed by us. And that was very intentional. I think that when we got to the idea of doing this, we didn't want to do anything that was the same as what was out there already. We weren't interested in releasing, sort of another dive watch reissue or something like that. And because of that, every piece was specific. And so I understand that can be a challenge. We've had people say to us, I know the watch space really well, and I thought it was, virtually impossible or prohibitively expensive to get pieces made that weren't, round cases or standard shape hands or what have you. And that's, incredibly fortunately, the exact opposite of the experience that we've had. I think of our factory and the person who runs our factory as, a true partner in what we're doing here. And I've come to him with questions and said, what do you think about this? And not design questions, but like, can we make this work? And every time his answer has been, yeah, let me get back to you. But and then about a day later, he's got a solution that works. And not only works, but helps the watch thrive, because, what was really important to us was not just to make something for the sake of making it. And I think that carries through, and Em can definitely speak to this better than me, but it carries through the entire ethos of the brand, is not just do it for the sake of doing it, but do it in a way that's unique and sustainable and allows us to, push the boundaries and take advantage of the benefit we have of not being watch industry people.
Emily, we're going to say something?
I was thinking about it, but it might just take us into the weeds. Your question just really resonates with me so much, because with any creative endeavor, right? Like, I've been a creative for 20 years throughout magazines and tech. Like, any creative endeavor, you're going to hit roadblocks, right? And you have to be prepared to go with the flow or pivot, or just be like, okay, this project sucks. Let's finish it and move on. And so two things come to mind. Like, yes, we have to be prepared for something potentially to come in the future. And I think we're really set up for success to face that throughout our own experience, whether it's in a creative project in the watch industry or outside of the industry, and just taking both of our backgrounds and applying them. But now I'm on the lookout for a potential roadblock. We'll see.
I want to go to the matter of cost. Ostensibly, unless I don't understand the situation correctly, you each had to put up the money for the prototyping and the production, things like that. There's a cost associated with that. It's not as high as you might think, but it's definitely not bargain basement. Talk about the family conversation of, are we investing this? I mean, I imagine you put the amount of money in there that a nice car would cost. Maybe more, I don't know, but talk about that conversation and the emotions that flew around in discussing this investment. It very much is an investment.
Can I make a really bad joke? It was like watches, child's future education, one of the two. So we went with watches. Maybe it wasn't that good.
That is so not true.
It's absolutely not true.
If your kids don't end up going to college, don't let them hear this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny because one of the amazing things that we could certainly talk about the cost and that process and the conversation. One of the amazing things that's come out of this is that our older daughter, Noah, who is 8 years old, has really caught the watch bug. And Em and I actually worked with her to design a kid's watch, which we lovingly call Paparita, or Little Papar, which we may end up releasing at some point. But and so she wears the prototype and got very excited and really into the design process. So that's been an amazing perk of this being a family business.
So it doesn't sound like there was that much conflict. It sounds like you were both open-minded to the idea of this is something worth spending money on. Well, is it because as a watch collector, you were already spending a bunch of money on the hobby?
I jokingly say that Em's very patient and I'm very lucky. And it's not so much of a joke. It's very true. And we've been really thoughtful and considerate throughout this whole thing about how much money we spend and where it comes from. I mean, we're fortunate to have good careers that we continue doing. And there are ways to do this that are not a bargain, as you say, but are doable. So, and I think the fact that we didn't set out to start a watch company from the beginning also helped us not, sink a bunch of money into it. This really was, baby steps. We did the CAD design and paid the money for that. And then we made the first prototype. And then we made our prototypes in a very thoughtful way up to a point where, we were doing resin 3D printing, we were doing steel 3D printing. So we didn't write a giant check and say, we're going to use this money to start a watch company. That said, the big cost obviously is doing an order, and we're doing 200 watches, which is not, some massive number, but it's not an insignificant number of watches, and it does cost a good amount of money. And we didn't want to go the crowdfunding route or anything like that. And we actually were really fortunate in that people liked what we were doing. You say, again, with full humility, because sometimes it's surprising to me, but we were able to pre-sell a good number of watches to really offset a lot of those costs for ourselves and make this something that was possible for us to do without putting a huge amount of money out of pocket. My previous company was a mental health company in the tech space, and for there we similarly didn't put a ton of money in, and were very thoughtful and considerate about it. And I think I learned a lot of lessons in that and from my previous co-founder that were actually really useful here.
So, Emily, I'm going to make a guess, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. Were you thinking at some point, maybe you still are, what if my family could actually stop spending money on watches and maybe make some money on watches?
Absolutely. 100%. And now not only is Josh designing, but Noah's designing. So we got everyone involved.
Okay.
Yeah. So there haven't been any late night links sent to my phone recently, which is good to watch purchases.
Okay. So that's an interesting dynamic. We'll have to explore that more in the future. I think many people don't necessarily understand how boutique some of these small brand operations are. And I'm guessing that the logistics and customer service is something you're doing in-house, literally. Talk about, setting up a small company at home, having to have watch boxes around and package things and handle customer service claims and all that stuff that is necessary, not fun, but comes with the territory, right?
Okay, I have to say, I love watch boxes and the package design and the fact that we've gotten to play with all of that. We ordered so many boxes to test out and packaging and stickers and how does this packaging relate to our brand ethos? We don't want to create more waste. So how do we think about that and what we're applying?
So you had fun with that.
Oh, yeah, I love that. I can't wait. Our kitchen table next week is going to be covered in all of this stuff. Yeah, I can't wait.
So you seem, this is an arts and crafts project for you.
Yes, I was just thinking, I was this is a craft night. I can't, everyone's going to be packing these boxes.
Do you think everybody would have that experience, or are there some people who feel completely overwhelmed by this? Because it sounds like you're taking a lot on, you're enthusiastic about it, which is great, but I don't assume that's a match for all personality types.
Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe not. I think it's just, to me, it's a design exercise, right? And building a watch company or building a watch rather, for me is the ultimate. I love functional design. If we can tap into that experience, there's nothing better. Wearing something beautiful that has a purpose, that represents a point of view, killer. As far as craft night, mixing textures, thinking about what's going to keep the product safe. How do we relay to our customer how grateful we are for this purchase with an insert that's also a certificate of authentication? There's so many things that go into it that to me is building the brand, right? Whether it's emotionally or physically, you're building the brand through these small interactions with your customer. Customer service, to be honest, it's been all Josh, but I will absolutely I will own and produce craft night.
I guess that makes me customer service, which I think is true. I would say M is definitely the creative force behind all of the branding and packaging and look and feel and making sure that we are truly on a, continuing to create a holistic narrative for the company. I am absolutely customer service, and we're, any emails that people get, they are hearing from me directly. I'm also our PR department, as Ariel, you're familiar with, because I sent many messages to the people in your team, to find our way over here. And it is interesting because we really do, we do it all, and I will fully admit I have a hard time drawing those boundaries sometimes, but it's also fun, honestly. We are at the stage of this where it is still a ton of fun. And I hope that continues. I mean, when, and alluded to this earlier, but when an order comes in, we get an email and we're literally cheering on the other side of the phone, whenever anyone orders, because it's still, it's just incredibly exciting. And I hope it continues like that. We have a lot of ideas, and I don't think this is a one-time thing. And we need to continue to have fun with it as well.
Obviously, there are a lot of positive things to be excited about. And as you said, you're having fun. And one of the worries that you probably have is, what if it no longer becomes fun? But more concretely, what are some of the things you worry about? Because there's a lot of unknowns. Both of you are intelligent people that, can assume certain potential scenarios, both good and bad. What are some of the things that make you a little bit nervous about the next 12 months?
I would say, without getting political, tariffs and where that may go and impact our business. I think, we can't be blind to that reality and see what happens there. Beyond that, look, we've done everything we possibly can to build not only a beautiful product, but all, in our opinion, but also one that is durable and well designed and has a very capable movement behind it. And so, I think the reality though is, God forbid, some of the watches stop working. We run into some sort of issue that was unforeseen. That's I think every small business owner's nightmare is, something's going wrong completely outside of my control. And I think those are the things that, we're aware of. I wouldn't say that any of them are keeping us up at night. The question we've gotten from other people also is, are we worried about, kind of a sophomore slump, or whether, we can do it again, assuming, and everything looks good, that, we sell through this run, in the near term, and where we go from there. But I think we have a lot of really good plans. And at the end of the day, it's nice to be partnered with your spouse, because, when one of you is freaking out, the other one is often a little more calm, and vice versa.
Yeah, my worries are actually more around slowing down, right? Like there's so much momentum right now to get to the next watch, to get to the next idea. Like this Friday, we have a planning meeting for 2025. And part of me is like, okay, let's let this watch get out the door. Let's hear our feedback. And there seems to be just this tension between staying on top of it, staying relevant, staying new, and also just finding that right balance and the timing to release new products, to evolve. So yeah, I just see we're moving really quickly, and that kind of goes back to your question before. And I want to make sure that we retain the quality and the thoughtfulness that's gone into the Anillo throughout 2025 and beyond.
I would say, just to add on to that, I think it makes a really, really good point. And it is something that we've talked about a lot, because it's kind of this fine line, right? Because on one hand, we want to be very aware of where we are and very present. And we are, incredibly excited about the fact that, anyone is daring to give us $750 of their money. It's not a huge amount of money in the grand scheme of things, certainly not in watches, but it's not a small amount of money either. So it is walking this fine line between being present with where we are and thoughtful about, the product we have in market now, but also recognizing that, this is not a one-off thing. It took us a while to decide we were starting a watch company, but now we have a watch company. And so, we owe it to the people who spend their money on our watches to be around next year and the year after, and to, bring them other things that they hopefully find to be, equally as interesting and exciting as the first offering.
Thank you for sharing all that. What I wanted to say is hopefully a wise way of explaining this type of scenario. Now, a watch company today, unlike maybe yesterday where they had to respond to market demand, it's like, people need to tell the time. We need units. It doesn't work that way. It's an artistic endeavor, meaning that you make something that you then need to convince people they want, because they don't automatically want it. And one of the very practical problems which happens with running a watch company, big or small, is that you have to be inventing new things all the time. You can't just respond to what your inbox does. If you just do that, your watches will get made, customer service issues will get done, little things will happen, but you're not creating the zeal, you're not creating the dream, you're not communicating artistically. You have to set time aside to do, for lack of a better term, inventing. You have to create new stuff to be artistic. to say, how can we dazzle the world next? What can we show them that they didn't know they wanted until now? But now that we're showing it to them, they suddenly have a desire for it. And that's the biggest problem the watch brands have, is they tend to be run by very well-organized people who don't remember they need to schedule in disorganized time, where you do playful things or joke around. And when it's fun, it can be a very fantastic environment for a family to come up with a lot of solutions to problems very quickly. It's when it sort of gets routine or not as fun, where you have to have the discipline of doing that. And that's going to affect both of you, but really affects every single brand out there. Even Rolex has to make the decision. So what do we do next year? We know we're making watches. We know we're making a lot of the same watches, but we have to do something different. How that comes about is nothing that a formula or procedure can tell you. It's a very emotional experience. And again, it's hard to build in because in a sense, it's quite unplanned.
Yeah, I have thoughts, and I'm guessing Em does as well. Do you want to go first, Em?
No, I feel like what you're saying just speaks so generally to the creative process as well. Like, this is not a new issue or something that comes up. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, finding that balance between coming up with that new idea, coming up with that concept that maybe pushes boundaries or is unexpected, and giving yourself that time to play. I don't know, maybe this is like too personal and we can edit this out maybe later, but we actually have one night a week there's like nothing to be done. Everyone's allowed to make tons of mistakes. And if you want to like do arts and crafts all night, that's totally fine. And you want to eat peanut butter and jelly, that's totally fine. Like, we have one night a week where everybody can just chill and play, and you don't need to be on your routine. And so that idea of playfulness isn't just implemented as a creative. We implement it as a family too. Like, everybody sort of needs that time. In my opinion, we all need that time to just like let go a little bit. And the
whose
more
idea was that in the family? I'm just curious.
It was, I worked with an amazing coach, and she helped, because I was sort of burnt out as a creative, and she was like, okay, you just need a night and this is how you're going to do it. And we worked together on this idea, and it really is great. So yeah, I don't know if that's too much information, but we implement it. Okay.
I mean, that someone gave you insight to do that is fortunate for you. Most people can't see themselves from a distance to realize they're stuck in a mode where they're burning themselves out. They're not recharging their creative juices. They're not exploring new things. They're not entering spaces where it's okay to fail, right?
Yes.
And that's, yes. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this. Yet to learn new things, I believe you need to enter a playful space in your mind. If you don't act like a child, you will never pick up new skills. And I think that's really crucial. And not just new skills, it's open-mindedness to new ideas, to see things from new perspective. You must engage in what we essentially call play. And adults don't do it automatically. So it's funny that we have to use discipline and a schedule to do what children do quite spontaneously. It's sort of like you're supposed to exercise naturally, yet we get gym memberships and force ourselves to walk in the same place for 45 minutes or something like that. It's a strange type of thing until you think about, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Wait, I need this. This is important to do. I have to force myself to do this thing, which I'm supposed to enjoy, which is supposed to bring me good things. And I'm great that I'm guessing it's been a couple of years now, you've discovered all these, these good habits. They don't necessarily need to apply to running a watch brand, but you're learning it all within the context of starting a watch brand, which can benefit the entire community, because you're not the only couple who's facing these issues. Let's be honest.
Yeah. And even like, it's funny you talk about discipline and incorporation, right? Like the gym membership and now I have to go. I think the way that we sort of look at it is more like a practice, right? Like, how do we practice? How do we exercise this muscle so that it can get stronger? What can we give it? Maybe not every day, but often, so it has a little bit more flexibility. So those moments can happen a little more spontaneously. So
you're right. Not everyone responds well to discipline. I get that.
Yeah. Fair enough. But yeah, practice.
Now, let's go on to the related topic of brutalism. I have been just personally listening to a lot of history on the communist world, big on brutalist architecture and things like that. You mentioned that the aesthetic is a combination of your love of vintage and brutalism. And brutalism is pretty vintage, right? It's not exactly a new thing. Is this because you liked vintage watches and brutalist aesthetic and wanted to do something? Just talk a little bit about how these two concepts came together to intersect into the Anillo watch.
Yeah, so definitely. And can I add one more thing onto sort of what Em was talking about as well, which is awesome, which is around the attitude that we bring to this and the idea of not only letting things go a little bit, but also having a little bit of fun with it. There's a lot of fun in the Anillo. There's a smiley face hidden on the back of it, just by way of a quick example. But thinking about the attitude we bring to it. And to your initial point, we were asking the question about the fact that people don't necessarily need a watch. For us, the goal with Anillo was also to create sort of this tool for emotional connection, like a GMT watch. When you're traveling, for me, when I look down at my wrist when I'm away, I like to be able to see at a glance, the time of day where the girls are and where Emma is. And so that is actually what led to the, in addition to the functional sector dial, the logo on the watch is a crescent moon, which is laser cut out with a gradient color wheel behind it. So the logo changes color throughout the course of the day to give a visual representation of the time of day and your home time and create that emotional connection. So that's part of what really came out in the design from that opportunity to let things go a little bit that Em was talking about.
Is that where one of the design patents comes into play, I'm guessing?
So one of the design patents is in the functional sector dial, and the other one, to your question about brutalism, actually is in the design of the dial. In the design of the bezel. So to your question, about brutalism, I've always loved brutalist architecture, and I do love vintage things, but I particularly love vintage-sized things as well. And so the idea of creating a watch that was sort of vintage in proportions, at sort of the 36 millimeter size, a little more classic of a size, but inspired by brutalist architecture, having a bit of a more bold, edgier feel, as well as the bezel on the watch is actually inspired by folded paper. So it was inspired by, one day Em was actually folding paper airplanes with our daughters when we were in Mexico. And this idea of paper that sort of overlaps itself. So if you look at the watch on the bezel in the four corners, the watch bezel appears to overlap itself. It kind of goes like that. And then at 12, 3, 6, and 9, it comes to a slight tent, like a folded piece of paper. So those two designs, both the folded paper and the brutalism, really seem to, jive well together. And beyond that, honestly, just a style that really spoke to me. My watch is perched up on an Atlas of Brutalist Architecture book right now as we're speaking.
What are your opinions on brands that take a very different approach, which is rather than trying to come up with something novel and trying to present originality in their first project, they go the opposite route and say, you already want something like this. Here's just a slightly different flavor of it. In a lot of ways, those brands can have more immediate success because they're selling something familiar, yet it's difficult to have long-term success because they don't ultimately have anything original. Whereas the reverse is true with something where you begin with something original. It can take time, a lot of time, to get people okay with the idea, to get them to try it on and see like, oh, that does look cool. But, if you're lucky, you get that, what they call the icon status, right? Where people associate that shape with you, which is exactly what you want. And I think that every brand has to make that decision very early on. Am I trying to produce something familiar that people ostensibly already want, or do I want to be an artist here and defend my creation, even if it takes years, because I think ultimately people will see what I see?
Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah.
I can only speak from a personal experience, and one of my absolute favorite things to do as a creative is to deliver something that people aren't sure they like. Right? I like that experience because it gives them an opportunity to be like, well, okay, no, or maybe, and then there's this moment where it's like, oh, I get it. And I like it. And it maybe that whole emotional experience actually ties them closer to the product itself. And that doesn't mean that's going to be everybody's experience. But for me, that's something I really enjoy. I enjoy delivering something you don't expect you're going to like. And then you have that interaction.
So familiarity
Definitely.
was never a route for you.
I don't think so. I think the idea of creating kind of another dive watch reissue or another field watch didn't resonate with us. It wasn't really something that inspired us and felt really good. And, it's funny because sometimes, synchronicity, right? Like our watch came out right around the same time that the Tolano Chan watch came out, right around the same time that the AP reissue 2 came out. And so sometimes, a whole bunch of people have similarly inspired ideas at the same time. And I think that's an interesting commentary on sort of the state of the watch industry right now. And maybe there is a little more openness to, sort of more funky designs or something a little bit more unique. We take it as a compliment every time we're compared to those watches and are, more than happy to be the $750 option to the $4,000 Toledano Chan and the $40,000, whatever it is, AP. So if we are people's, entry into trying on a watch that is a little bit different and going outside of their box a little bit in their comfort zone, while still, look, our watch is a little bit different, a little bit avant-garde, but it's certainly not, so far out in left field that it's completely unapproachable.
Yeah, just to piggyback on top of that, like, I don't think familiar is bad, right? There's comfort to that. And I think we try to tap into that with the size and the way it sits on the wrist and that sort of vintage feel. But I just think we're looking more towards nostalgia, and there's a familiar in that as well. Again, just working on creating that connection with the person who is wearing the watch.
I like to challenge ideas. It's something that I do a lot. And I want to ask the question, what's wrong with the alternative to vintage, which is contemporary or modern? People like to always emphasize vintage style, vintage inspired, vintage theme, vintage. Very few people are saying new, modern, futuristic. What is so unappealing about the other side of that? We'll call it a temporal story.
I don't think there's anything unappealing about it at all. I think there's something really appealing about it. I think that a lot of what we're doing is different and modern and intentionally so. I would say the only thing vintage about our watch is the classic sizing. And maybe sort of classic, maybe more gender neutral is an appropriate way to say it. But and to me, the fact that our watch has the same exact proportions as a vintage Datejust, links into something that I think is timeless. And, Em and I have talked about this a whole bunch. We truly hope that the watch we've made will feel timeless, and will be something that people resonate with for a long time because it is new and different, but it's also, it's nice for there to be a touch of familiar. And even if that is just this size feels right because it's tried and true. And Rolex has made that watch in that size for, 70 years, whatever it may be. There's a reason for that.
I just also love this question because we should be challenged, right? These questions should be asked. We should be able to answer them from our own point of view. And just to agree with Josh, I don't think there's anything wrong with contemporary, right? Just because this is the direction of the first watch doesn't mean that the future won't take that into consideration, right? We're not trying to step and repeat. We want to change it up. We want to see where things go. We want to keep the brand in mind as we grow and keep producing watches. But that doesn't mean this one may have a vintage size and the next one could be more contemporary, right? It's all about the conversation. And that's why I absolutely love this question. I want to be challenged.
I'll approach the question in a different way because I think there's an interesting conversation. When many people today in the watch enthusiast space, especially on the brand side, use the term vintage, they don't actually mean something which is old. What do you feel they're trying to use by? I'm very picky with words. I don't like it when people start using words the wrong way. So I harp on this more than other people. But I think that shared meaning is the only way that we use language as a society. So I try to understand what does vintage now mean? Because I don't think it means what it vintagely meant.
Yeah, I don't think it means the same thing, and it probably doesn't mean the same thing to everyone, which is, as certainly problematic. We're all using words to mean the same thing. For us, Look, we like the idea of there being a callback to the history of watches, particularly as people who don't come from that history. You know, we're not watch designers by trade. We're also similarly not people who are digging up, you know, kind of from the archives of an old dead Swiss guy, an idea and then bringing it back to life in any way. So I think for us, creating something that is vintage is the feel that underlies it. It's the sizing as well. And I think that, you know, beyond that, there's really an intentionality in the things that we are doing. You know, the Anillo is 36 millimeters, in part because we do like that vintage sizing, and in part because that's the right size for this dial layout, for this version of the functional sector dial. And, you know, to what Em was saying, we're not kind of planning to rest on our laurels. We have a lot of ideas for places to go, and all of them will maintain the spirit of the brand and the sort of holistic brand vision that we've created. And they will all be equally as intentional. So, you know, in my mind, if we do a 40 millimeter watch, we're going to do a 40 millimeter watch because we're going to do something cool with an extra 4 millimeters that we have available to us that we didn't have on the Anillo. And so, you know, I guess that's a bit of a tangent from the conversation about vintage, but I think all of it goes to the idea of doing something that's intentional and resonates with people in places that they feel comfortable and familiar, which may be the vintage, but also pushes them to try something a little bit different and know that we are doing it differently for a very, very good and intentional reason.
I appreciate you entertaining this discussion, and I'll give you an example. I've even written about this. I've told the watch industry that it needs to have a moratorium on the term heritage. It's been using heritage so much, especially in product names, that it effectively means nothing anymore. And I'm trying to protect, you know, this endangered word from being genericized into just being marketing blah, like the word natural, right? That doesn't mean anything anymore. So I defend these terms because they need to be used in specific instances. It sounds like vintage for you just meant, hey, maybe it looks big, but it's not big. That's basically what it sounds like you meant to say, and you tried to find one word that could speak that. Obviously, we established that there's a slightly different thing that is maybe meant by vintage, but I think it's important in an era where words matter so much to the storytelling of watches. It used to be, and we look at the ads, picture of a watch, name of a brand, no words, right? For many years, that's how a lot of watch lovers thought that a watch needed to be communicated. It's just the design of it. But I think that modern watch media, aBlogtoWatch and a lot of others that are very conversational based have demonstrated that something else needs to combine with the beautiful imagery to make people want this. This is storytelling. So I'm very defensive when it comes to the way brands use words, because I'm like, storytelling is important. Tell an actual story. And there was a brand recently that within the last few months showed me a prototype watch, wanted to call it heritage. And I said to them, just don't. Why don't you call it what you think about in your mind when you think of good heritage? And they did, and it worked out well. But like, I had to push them, and they really just wanted to use the word heritage again. And so I think that that's actually an interesting next bastion of creativity that needs to be explored, is we have a lot of interesting designs right now. I don't think we have enough interesting stories to explain the designs or the people behind them or their way they're made or how you intend their purpose to be. And I think that that is an area that requires, again, more innovation. How can you at Papar, with your background and skills, add to, we'll call it the functional lexicon of the watch industry by attaching stories to your watches that use a lot of original terms and maybe less things like vintage?
I think that's a great point. And I think that, from our perspective, this is about starting a conversation. And I think that the conversation from Papar comes from two places. It comes from the design, which we believe is, very unique and brings some new designs and new ways of showing old things and ways that are both accessible and also will feel very new. And at the same time, to your point about the story, the story of this brand is in every single detail of this watch. Everything from the inspiration of the case and the brutalist architecture and the feel around when we lived in Mexico, to the paper airplanes inspiring the bezel, to, on the back of the watch is a version of the symbol of the country where we were living, the city where we were living when we designed the watch. Our kids have been involved in every element of this. And so to us, this is a story, this watch is, it sounds a little cheesy, but this watch is a story of us and our family at this moment in time. And because of that, the next version of the watch or the next watch may be a little bit different, but it will all come from this same place, which is a focus on us, who we are, the things that inspire us, and creating that connection among the four of us, and hopefully allowing other people to connect to their loved ones when they're far away and want to feel a little bit closer to them.
I'll give you a tip I learned, and then I'll proceed on to my last question because we're almost out of time. And that is, many people, when they come up with a fresh design, have an instinct to put little, we'll call them Easter eggs in there that are for themselves. And what they end up doing is they end up creating a very personal design for themselves, which is great for them, but it can actually be hard for other people to relate to. You sort of said at the end there that you want other people to feel the same way. To do that, you have to do the very difficult thing, it's possible, it's difficult, of making something which both means something to you and others. Something which is personal enough, but not so personal that other people don't have their own experiences with that image, theme, statement, color, whatever, right? The last question is, let's say that the first model is a runway success. You have a bunch of sales, maybe a few production runs, and then you're like, okay, now we have some additional funds to make the next product even more detailed, even better. If you had just a little bit more resources, what are some additional things you would like to add so that you can offer your customers something else that they don't have already?
I love that question. And I think that it's a fine line starting a brand, because there are obviously some layups, if hopefully when the Anillo is a huge success. And so far, we've been incredibly grateful for the number of orders that we've gotten and the way it's been received. There are some easy ones. There are changing dial colors and things like that. Something we've talked about and focused on is the idea of never truly releasing the same exact watch twice. And that can be as simple as, changing the color of the triangle, that's the GMT indicator, or some small things like that, to do something, fresh and different each time. Beyond that, we don't just kind of have this one design that we are sitting on and saying this is going to be the thing that we stick with. There are a number of other dials in the works. There are a number of other case designs in the works. And, Em mentioned earlier the conversations we're having about 2025. The idea is to release new watches. I think it's part of the benefit we have of being, a husband and wife team and being a small company, is we don't feel the need to release 1,000 watches next year because we did 200 this year, which doesn't mean that if, people aren't interested, we don't want to, sort of fill demand. Obviously, we're excited to get the watch on as many wrists as we possibly can. But I think for us, the opportunity to do more and to do new things is less about having the extra resources or, the financial capital to do those things, and more about doing the things that we see as being kind of the next logical and fun and exciting step for the brand. And those things don't really cost extra money. And to your point about the details, there are things on this watch that are very personal to us. I sort of joked with them that the front and the sides of the watch are for everyone else, but the case back is for us. And that doesn't mean that it has, writing all over it the story of our meeting or our kids, but there are opportunities to include those things. And I think you make a very good point that there's a fine balance to walk between, making it feel sentimental and nice to us and making it accessible and relatable to other people.
I totally agree. I really appreciate that insight of finding the right balance between personal and applicable to everyone. But just on the note of Easter egg, and as you mention it, we were in San Miguel this past year, and I was at a birthday party, and this woman showed up, and she had purchased do you know the story I'm going to tell? I feel like I hear you laughing. Okay. She purchased a Cartier bracelet at auction. And inside I don't know if she knew at the time when she purchased it, but when she was showing us the bracelet, she opened the clasp, And inside the bracelet, there was a little sliding door that opened. And when that door opened, like it just slid across the bracelet, it revealed a Swiss bank account number.
Cool.
Cool, right? So cool. And that's now the new method I want to apply to our Easter eggs. I mean, not that every watch will come with a Swiss bank account, but that like, it almost feels like you're revealing a deep historic secret, right? Like she called the bank to see if the bank account was still active. Sadly, it wasn't. But just contributing to this idea of history. And
like owning the bracelet will get you access.
Totally, right? And it turned out that some royalty purchased this bracelet for a mistress, and that's where they were hiding. That's how they got them money. That's how they
Clever.
Right. Like, so I really appreciate the feedback. And now it makes me think, okay, we're only applying the Cartier perspective of Easter eggs going forward, 2025.
No pressure. No pressure.
I'm looking forward to the Papar Mistress bracelet.
That's coming in 2026. You got to give us a little time.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we're out of time, but before we end, could you please remind everyone where they can visit Papar on the internet and anywhere else that they can learn information about the brand or either of you?
Absolutely. So the watches can be purchased on our website, which is paparwatchco.com. And we can be found on Instagram at Papar Watches. And please, we would love to, putting money aside, putting anything else aside, we would love to get this watch on as many people's wrists as possible because we're really excited about what we've built and really proud of it. And we hope that when you put it on, you'll feel that way as well. And Ariel, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with Emily and Josh from Papar Watch Company. Emily and Josh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.